Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in Matthew chapter 5, and we are in verse 17, and this is, Jesus kind of shifts his thought. And remember, as he started the sermon, verses 1 through, or 3 through 16, he was sort of preparing his disciples. The whole Sermon on the Mount is Jesus teaching his disciples his standard, you could say his criteria for being his disciples. And you can also say it is his standard for being his standard of righteousness. His standard of righteousness in comparison to the, I'm going to say standard of religion. So let me pull up my screen because as we move on through this, there's going to be some very interesting, again, thoughts that Jesus brings up. Let's see here. Let's go back to Matthew 5. Excuse me. This from 3 to 11 was Jesus. Let me get this here. It was Jesus giving us godly characters. Okay, that this is how our characters should be. I say this just in way of reminder because I see people, Christians today, who want to display any quality other than this. Okay, and then he says we're the salt of the earth, and let our light shine before men. All right, now in verse 17, he says, "Don't assume that I came to destroy the law and the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill." So now he shifts. Remember, one of the thought behind this here is dealing with the mindset that the Pharisees had contaminated the people of Israel with. The Pharisees were a group of people that came on the scene over 100 years before Jesus was born. They were set up by the Roman Empire. Part of their job, even though they were strict adherences to the law, but part of their job was to keep Israel in line. In other words, Rome didn't care that when they conquered a culture, they didn't care so much that if you retain some of this culture or your religion, but just as long as you knew that Rome was in charge. So you had two entities that Rome put into place. One was a ruler, Herod, that was more the political side. And the two on the religious side, it was the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin. But the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And they sort of, their job was to keep Israel in line. You'll see this throughout, even at one point, that the Pharisees complain that Jesus was messing up their game. You know, he says, "Oh man, the Romans going to come and take our place, take us from our place." Now, and that was a serious concern. It was a valid concern, but they were not true to God's word. So one of the things that Jesus is having to deal with is, so they had freedom to keep the law. They had freedom to kind of do what they want. Remember, just like with Matthew at the tax collector, Part of his job was to collect taxes for Rome. He would overcharge the people. This is why tax collectors were so hated. They were really ostracized as well. In other words, they were invited to the cookout. Of course, the greed overrid their sorrow, but they were overridden by their greed. But the Pharisees enjoyed, again, a kind of unchecked power. And if you crossed them, they had the power to kind of deal with you. And uh, one of the things they would enforce is their version of the law. The Pharisees, the two groups, the Sadducees and the Pharisees, kind of much like today when we have progressive and then conservative. Now, from this perspective, from a political standpoint, they're just opposite sides of the same evil coin, and the same here. The Sadducees and the Pharisees were just opposite sides of the same evil religious coin. The problem with the Pharisees, was that though they pretended to be the more pious of the group, and they also became Jesus' arch enemy. Okay, so one of the things that they could use, that if Jesus would have said that he was the Messiah, if he had said he was the Messiah, they would have marched him before Pilate. Also keep this in mind, because they were under the control of the Roman Empire, the enemy, the Pharisees could not execute anyone. They could not put anyone to death, because trust me, if they could, Jesus would have been executed. So this is why you will see how this will play out. They will keep picking at Jesus, trying to find something that they could say, okay, he is violating Roman law, let's march him before Pilate. Now, when Jesus says here, I came not to destroy the law or the prophets. Now, the Old Testament is, from our theological framework, the Old Testament, well, you could say that the Bible is divided, you could say, in the various sections. So obviously the Old and New Testament. The New Testament would be the Gospels. And if you want to include the book of Acts, then you can also say the letters of Paul. Excuse me. Ooh. Then you can say the general epistles. And then the book of Revelation. Close out with the book of Revelation. The Old Testament is 3 sections. It is the historical section from Genesis to Ezra. And that's a narrative. It includes the first 5 books, which is also called the law. But because within the law there is a historical narrative, so theologically it's classified as a historic site. Then you have the books of wisdom, literature, you can say, from Job to the Songs of Solomon. And then you have the writings of the prophets. Okay. Now, notice he said the law or the prophets. So Jesus said, I did not come to destroy the law or the prophet. So here's a question, and we face this today with many people. Where does the law fit? Where does the law fit with us in Christianity? In other words, do we have to obey the law? Of course, if Jesus says here, I came not to destroy the law or the prophets, he said, I did not come to destroy it, but to fulfill. So do we have to keep the law? And that's a good question. So I want to take a look at a couple of scriptures to kind of answer that. Let's go to Galatians chapter 3. I want to look at a couple of verses here about the law of Moses. Do we have to keep the law? All right, this is in Galatians chapter 3. So look at verse 10, and it says, "For all who rely on the works of the law are under a curse, because it is written, everyone who does not continue doing everything written in the book of the law is cursed. Now it is clear that no one is justified before God by the law, because the righteous will live by faith." Now, the word justify, two words need to be very, when it comes to, if you're saying, I'm going to obey the law, two things need to be aware of. The word justify and the word justice and justification and the same thing with righteousness, they come from a group of words. Well, just is the act of making someone right. The act of making someone right. Righteousness means being in right standing. It is the result of being made right, and thus you are right before God. Now look at what he says right here. So if you're going to be justified by the law, he says, everyone who does not continue doing everything written in the book of the law is cursed. So you have to do everything in it. Let me go to another verse. Let me go to another verse here. James chapter 2. James chapter 2. Look at verse 10. He says, for whoever keeps the entire law, yet fails in one point, is guilty of breaking it all. For he who said, do not commit adultery, also said, do not murder. So if you do not commit adultery, but you do murder, you are a lawbreaker. Now, what is the point that he's saying right here? If you're going to keep the law standard, saying this is important because this is what Jesus is contrasting, okay? If you're going to keep the law, you must keep the law perfectly all the time. So that if you break the law in any point, you break the entire law. So that's the standard of the law. So if you're seeking to be made right by God, then you have to keep if you're seeking to be made right by God by keeping the law, then you have to keep the entire law perfectly. Let me show you one more verse. Because, and let me just say this, the law represents to me, the entire religious system that man invents. That when we think about the religions of the world, and that's including Christianity, most of Christianity think in their human effort to get to God, in their human effort, they think they have to do something in order to be saved. They have to do good works, good deeds. They have to live right, live holy in their own effort in order to be right with God. Well, that's you really don't want that. Let me let's see here. Did I want Ezekiel? Where did I Ezekiel? Yes, here we go. All right. So this is Ezekiel chapter 33. Let me read you this, because this is going to be frightening, especially for those who think I must do something in my own effort. Listen to this. Verse 12 says, "Now, Son of Man, say to your people, the righteousness of the righteous person will not save him on the day of his transgression, neither will the wickedness of the wicked person cause him to stumble on the day he turns from his wickedness. The righteous person won't be able to survive by his righteousness on the day he sins. When I tell the righteous person that he will surely live, but he trusts in his righteousness and commits iniquity, then none of the righteousness will be remembered, and he will die because of his iniquity that he's committed." Now, this is a very harsh truth here that God had just said. If you want to be, again, righteous by the law, let's say you live 100 years. You live 99 of those years doing everything right. Here's the standard of the law. You do everything right for 99 years. And in that 99th year, you sin. Now, here's a harsh truth. He says, none of that which you've done for the 99 years is wiped out. It means nothing. It's done. So that's why when Jesus says, "I didn't come to destroy the law," I'll get back to that in a moment, "I've come to fulfill it." And this is why we see that Christ is the end of the law for righteousness. But I want to show you something else in Colossians chapter 1. And I want to show you this gem here, because if you were disheartened by what I just read, you should be. Because here's the thing, if you're trying to live right, the law is sort of this giant umbrella for religion. And this is why you see in every denomination, most of Christianity, as I said, they have a work-based salvation. You must do something in order to be saved. You must live right. But listen here, here's some good news. In Colossians chapter 1, verse 21 says, "Once you were alienated and hostile in your minds because of your evil actions." So this is where you start off with, "I'm evil." And you cannot change that. There's a couple of problems with people who think they can live right and be good enough to make it to heaven. One, you're dead in sins. Secondly, you're incapable of meeting God's standard according to the law. But look at this, verse 22. "But now he has reconciled you by his physical body through his death." So stop. He reconciled you. Who is that? Jesus. He reconciled you by his physical body through death to present you holy, faultless, and blameless before him. You were presented holy, faultless, and blameless. Notice he didn't say anything that's done in your body. No matter how you dress according to what you say is holy, no matter none of the good works or the good deeds that you say you do, none of that presents you holy, blameless, and faultless before God. What presents you holy and blameless and faultless before God is what Jesus has done in his physical body. So, there's a scripture that says that Jesus is the end of righteous law. I just can't think of where it's at. I think it's in Galatians, but I just can't. But it says Jesus is the end of all righteous. So when he says here, don't assume that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. Now notice, Jesus fulfilled it. What he didn't say is that I didn't come to tell you not to destroy, but I came that you can fulfill. No, he said, I came to fulfill it. And we saw how Jesus then is the fulfillment of the law. More on this in the next study. More on this in the next study. We'll pick this up. One of the hardest things that will happen is to overcome the religious, and I'm talking about including Christianity. A lot of people don't think they're religious, but just think about this. The word religion means an observance. Okay, it is an observance, and Christians observe. Okay, Christians observe. And the fact that you go to church every Sunday, that's religious. It's a certain practice, right? You go to church every Sunday, you do the same things every Sunday. You go to church, you greet it, sit down, you sing, depending on how they order it, you take up the offerings, announcements. That is an observance. But the problem, of course, is people think I have to do these things in order to be right with God. And that's where the problem comes in at. But anyway, we'll pick it up next time. Don't forget to like and share this video. And subscribe to the Bible Made Plain and Simple, or the Bible Plain and Simple. If you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. I'll see you in the next study.